Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 224 and I am the show's host, Kyle. On this show, I try to focus on the foreign policy current events, kind of go over the stories as they're unfolding and what's going on. Highlight details on the stories. Occasionally I have on guests. The past two episodes of the show I've gotten really good feedback on. 222 was on Russiagate and the Trump-Putin summit, and Will Porter was the guest there. And then I've gotten very good feedback on episode 223, which was on the roots of the immigration crisis with guest Brian Sadie. Brian, who hosts the Rackets podcast, explains how U.S. interventionism in El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala really and created a large portion of this immigration crisis that we're now dealing with. I mean, yeah, this. I'm not saying this is the solution, anything that we talk about in this podcast, to what to do with the people who are illegally in America or are showing up at the southern border. But at the same time, if you could stop creating destabilization and so much violence in so many of these countries, the people wouldn't have such bad lives that they fear for their lives and are fleeing to the United States. So check out those two episodes, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, or I think the best place to find the show is libertarianinstitute.org. It's there on the homepage. And then you can also find the show at, iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, YouTube, BitChute. The, channel names there are Immersion News, which of course is the name of my website, immersionnews.com. All right, so let's get into the news. The first thing I'm going to talk about is some news on Russiagate that has developed since the episode I recorded with Will. The first is that we have some testimony from Lisa Page, who is the lover of FBI investigator Peter Strzok, as I believe how people are saying his name. Now, I believe this was an extramarital affair by these two, so this should, raise into some, questions of concern. You have all these people who are out there openly saying that Donald Trump is a puppet of Russia because there's a P-tape or some other kind of blackmail that Vladimir Putin has on Donald Trump. Now here you have two people in the FBI engaged in an affair, and nobody's questioning their integrity because, you would think this would have been possible blackmail. Now I'm not saying that was. I'm just saying it's interesting how nobody ever questions the integrity of Peter Strzok and his affair with Lisa Page. Now, it was episode 212 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast, part 2 of my Russiagate series with Dan Wright and Joanne Leone, where we really detail who Peter Strzok is and, how involved he was in both the investigation of Hillary Clinton's emails and then the investigation into Donald Trump that began in May, June of 2017. Text messages have already revealed and caused Mueller to actually remove Peter Strzok as the lead investigator or whatever he was on the Russiagate case looking into collusion between Donald Trump and Russia, Vladimir Putin, in conspiring to steal the election from Hillary Clinton. So he plays a very important role. There's a very interesting text message that Joanne Leone talked about a lot on this show, and she's talked about on her own show around the Empire podcast, which is really great. And that text message is from Peter Strzok to Lisa Page saying that he would be pushing to be on the Russiagate investigation. This is, of course, before he's actually appointed to being an investigator. However, he doesn't believe there's any there. Now, there was a lot of questions leading up to this as what it meant. As any of us who have texted people in the past know that sometimes they misread what you're actually trying to say. But then Lisa Page confirmed to us what Peter Strzok was saying in that text messages. He did not believe that there was any collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government before he became lead investigator. So this raises, I think, a lot of questions into, that the whole Russiagate campaign is likely politically motivated, that there's any real evidence to prove that the Russian government was involved in any way in influencing or hacking the DNC servers, and that it does look at this point like the whole Russiagate conspiracy lacks any evidence to really prove any of the claims that they make, ranging from Russia had the emails of Hillary Clinton, John Podesta, the DNC, etc., to they conspired with Donald Trump to release the emails in a way that would help him to win the election, that they use Wikileaks as a cutout for this, and, all the way up to now Vladimir Putin actually owns Donald Trump, and this is causing U.S. policy to cave to Russia. So at this point, I think it's more of like a mystical belief for a lot of people that they believe that, there's no way that Hillary Clinton could have lost to Donald Trump because Donald Trump is just that terrible of a person. And in an article by Ray McGovern, which I'll link to in the show notes page where I get most of this information. So read it. You'll get a lot more detail than what I'm going into here. He calls it the Hillary would have won crowd. And they're so bent on that Hillary Clinton should have won the election that they can't really see that, no, she lost just because she was a bad candidate. And yeah, Donald Trump's a terrible person. But in my opinion, he probably won because, he was the one that really admitted it, as well as being slightly better on and less hawkish on the war issues. Remember, it was Hillary's position all the way up until the end that we should institute a no-fly zone over Syria. Something that likely would have provoked direct war between the United States, the Syrian government, possibly Iran, and very likely Russia. And so it's no surprise that, you have a lot of these communities where polling data shows that they were the most affected by the Iraq war. And now we're not going to vote for a candidate who is going to put more of their family members or friends in danger in a war that they saw needless. There's a very good article out there that I'll link to in the show notes page. And I really hope all of you take the time to read it. It's titled, I grew up wanting to be Luke Skywalker, then realized you've become a stormtrooper for the Empire. This article is, the kind of a little confession by Daniel Crimmins from the U.S. Infantry 3rd Division, and he is an Iraq War II veteran. Now, this veteran explains that he was in college on 9/11 and was so moved by these, day's events and the emotions that he ends up going and enlisting, thinking he's going to go fight the bad guys. I mean, this is one of the first times really, at least in a very long time, but I guess you could go back to maybe an event like Pearl Harbor or before that, Native American attacks on the United States to see that the United States have been attacked very few times. And in the case of the Native Americans, it's a little bit more complicated, with the whole they were here first thing. But when this does happen, it draws a big response from the Americans. And it's not like in Afghanistan where, say, the United States has dropped 300 bombs on them this year and they have been previously invaded by, pretty much every other empire in history, most recently the USSR. And so when Americans are attacked, there's a big response from Americans, and, this drives people to enlist. Now he enlists, and as it says, he thinks he's going to be Luke Skywalker, or, kind of that traditional rebel hero that goes out there, kills the bad guys, saves all the civilians, not just his own kind, but everyone, who's good is, likely going to be saved. Now, there may be a few casualties, but overall, everything's going to be positive, and people will be able to understand you're there to promote the greater good. I think a better example than Luke Skywalker, I think of like a Legolas, because I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, but, he's able to go through and only ever shoot the orcs, and, his arrows never stray and hit a civilian or one of his own guys. And, it's clear that there's these bad guys called the orcs, and all of them are evil. The whole race of them are evil. And the good guys are, the elves and the dwarves, etc. And so you can imagine that, if you're a young man or you grew up in the United States, you kind of think it's like this, that where's a situation where you have a chance to go there, be a real hero. What you're going to do is be put in a position where you could just fire at the enemy. You'll be able to clearly tell who the enemy are. They'll be evil. They'll be trying to kill you. They'll be trying to harm everyone, even maybe themselves. And you could do real positive good in the world. But then he explains this isn't what happens. It turns out the United States ends up occupying Iraq. We end up killing people with our bombs. He ends up kicking down doors of houses randomly with no information or intel, harassing people as they just try to eat their dinner or sleep at night, turning over houses looking for weapons, which he says they rarely found. And so then he realized that he's not Luke Skywalker. He's the stormtrooper that came to, his aunt and uncle's home and searched for him and ended up burning the place down. And so, that's a very powerful article. And, like I said, I'll link to that in the show notes page. Another very good article. There's been a lot of good journalism over the past weekend. And that is, by Justin Raimondo. He talks again about Russiagate here. And this is the FOIA, I believe from Judicial Watch, that revealed the FISA warrant on Carter Page. Now, the FISA warrant is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and this allows the United States government to get secret wiretaps on people. The FBI goes to these FISA courts. They say, we have this information that this person is doing something wrong, and for that reason, we need to be able to secretly surveil them and whoever they talk to. Now, these FISA courts allow 2 leaps. And so let's say they're surveilling Carter Page because he's involved in the Trump administration. This will allow them to take another leap and then surveil the officials of the Trump administration, possibly even Donald Trump himself. Now, what the FISA amendment or FISA warrant reveals is that the FBI's evidence for this warrant was relying on the Steele dossier, which is proven to have a lot of false information in it. And I believe this is in Foreign Policy Focus episode 211, again, part of the Russiagate series with Dan Wright and Joanne Leone, where we go over Carter Page and we discuss how, he didn't have any information and wasn't colluding with the Russians. In fact, in past attempts when Russian spies allegedly approached him and tried to recruit him, he actually went to the U.S. government and flipped and was an informant for the U.S. government, and his testimony was actually crucial in getting convictions. So it looks like the FBI used the Steele dossier, which again has false information, questionable in it, to get a surveillance warrant on somebody who has in the past proven to be loyal to the United States, and rather than, taking a chance, maybe trying to make some money working with the Russians, went to the U.S. Federal law enforcement agencies and was actually able to get the people who tried to recruit him convicted. So it seems like if he, was actually trying to be approached by the Russians, he just would have turned him in like he did the first time. It also shows that they try to corroborate the evidence in the Steele dossier with information, news stories out there saying that, they have this evidence that lines up. However, it turns out it was Steele that leaked the information that allowed those news stories to be printed. And so we're having a situation similar to Iraq War II, where the Bush administration was putting out information that was unsupported by evidence, and then they were leaking information to the media, and then they were saying, see, look, we have this claim here, and then here's the news story that proves it. However, the source is the same, and there's still no evidence in either case. So this is a very sneaky thing to do. It is terrible. If the Democrats in the Congress had any real principles, they would say, hey, this is the same thing that George Bush did in 2002. And because we're consistent and because we believe in the truth, we're going to call out the Obama administration or the FBI, even though it's not beneficial to, our desire to actually, redo the 2016 election or impeach Donald Trump or delegitimize his presidency. And we're going to go ahead and admit that the FBI did something wrong here. And we do this on principle because, again, we want the truth, but we're not going to see that. Also in the Raimondo article, he discusses the situation with Julian Assange. I believe it was Glenn Greenwald at The Intercept reported that Julian Assange is likely to be handed over to the UK government in the next year or two. And this likely means he faces another year to another decade in prison. Now, there was a change in government in Ecuador. The former leader of that country who granted Assange asylum and had defended him all those years. His argument was always that Ecuador is a sovereign nation and our embassy is sovereign, and the laws of our nation and what we believe says that journalists have the right to print information freely. And we see the arrest and imprisonment of Julian Assange as an attempt to basically stop freedom of the press. And so they granted Assange asylum and held it all those years. However, we now have Ecuador saying that the new leadership of Ecuador, in talks with both the UK and I believe they talked to the Spanish government as well, looking to turn over Julian Assange to those authorities. Now, for the past 3 months, Julian Assange has been pretty much cut off from the outside world, not given any internet access, but is still in the Ecuadorian embassy. This is mostly because of Assange's take and publicization of videos and stuff related to the Catalan independence movement, where you had last October the Catalonians go out and vote for independence from Spain and were savagely beaten by Spanish police officers in riot gear uniforms. They beat old ladies, firemen, and average civilians alike. And rather than, the rest of the world standing up and saying, oh my God, this brutal thing is happening in a Western European democracy, what the hell is going on? Old ladies going to vote are being hit in the heads with batons. This isn't right. They turned their bats on it. And the next day was, of course, the Mandalay Bay shooting in Las Vegas, which pretty much, allowed everybody not to really comment on the Las Vegas or the Catalan independence vote thing and just focus on that. So there are people though out there like, the anti-war folks and Julian Assange who did take what happened there and said this isn't right and worked as hard as he can to really expose it and show his solidarity with the Catalan independence movement. Interestingly enough, the Spanish Supreme Court actually withdrew the country's European arrest warrant for the former Catalan president and his 5 top advisors after they were issued an arrest warrant for, I believe they called it secession, but basically disloyalty to the Spanish government for holding this independence movement. Of course, the fact that the Spanish government responded to this secessionist movement by trying to stop the vote, sending out police officers in riot gear, then trying to actually imprisoning many Catalan independence leadership people, political figures, shows, why maybe the Catalans won independence. But the president there was, I believe, in Germany or Belgium. He was caught and tried in a German court on the European arrest warrant, and the Germans said, no, this isn't right. We're not going to arrest him. Or it may have been the Belgians, because I don't know which one that is. So the Spanish Supreme Court withdrew that amendment. However, those charges still stand. So should any of them return to their homes, they will be arrested and in prison for who knows how long. Back to the Assange thing just really quick. The foreign Ecuadorian prime minister did appeal to the Ecuadorian court system, to try to keep Assange with his asylum status. Now, he was granted, citizenship for Ecuador, so maybe there is some legal standing that Assange could have in an Ecuadorian court. However, I think he's unlikely to get that. And if Ecuador decides to turn him over, it seems like that's the direction that things are going. Now, interesting aspect to this is there's many people cheerleading this and have been very critical of WikiLeaks. However, all these people complaining that the United States withdrawing from NATO is going to create a situation in Europe where it'll be Finlandized, and this means that they'll all start to cave into the demands of Russia because Russia's the biggest power. However, this is what they're demanding that Ecuador do. It's been shown that the laws that Julian Assange is alleged to have broken, or what the United States wants him extradited for, aren't actual laws, freedom of speech kind of stuff. And so they're not turning him over. Of course, the UN has found that the kind of pretense for him being arrested was the sexual assault charges that are sometimes called rape charges. But the UN, ruled that his detention was arbitrary. So there's a lot of questions as to how legitimate that case is. And I think the Swedish government has actually dropped all those charges at this point anyways. So the only thing that he may be charged with right now or alleged to be guilty of is crimes by the United States. And there's a lot of people who say there's a secret indictment of Julian Assange that basically if he ever leaves the Ecuadorian embassy, he'll be extradited to the United States. But it does seem like, we'll see an example, and it's all good and everything when a country like Ecuador is Finlandized or, made to bend to the demands of a stronger power in exchange for their sovereignty, so long as the United States says so. I guess I just find it interesting that Matt Booth thinks it's literally the worst thing in the world if it happens in Europe, but then isn't going to say anything or even encourage it happening to Ecuador. I will say I would like to do a show coming up on the importance of WikiLeaks, specifically to the anti-war movement. If any of you have any suggestions on who to have to cover that subject, because certainly, the Chelsea Manning leads and a lot of these early leads by WikiLeaks that were important. I really, wasn't reading the news every day at the time. I think I was in high school for part of it. So I would like to have on somebody who was actually, doing the journalism at the time and talk to them about, how important those were. And I think that's important to remember today because everybody kind of now sees WikiLeaks as almost a political entity that released the DNC emails to lose Hillary Clinton the election. But actually back in the day, the left loved WikiLeaks and, saw them as being instrumental in releasing very important information that helped turn the public opinion of the Iraq war or Afghanistan war. I will say, I read this article on, the VA having a history of targeting the whistleblowers of the organization. People who try to expose the fact that patients are not being seen frequently enough or the health care is bad, that there's people who don't actually have licenses that are, treating and stuff like that. And in many cases, I think a majority of cases, these people have faced discipline in the next year, many of the people being terminated. And so that's the importance of organizations like WikiLeaks who could get that information out there and protect the sources. Because it's at a huge disadvantage to yourself to leak information, it's going to be a lot harder to do. If you could just, see something that's going wrong and tell it to your boss and your boss will fix it, they aren't going to point out every time something's going wrong. But the last 3 people that point out something to their boss have gotten fired. Well, now you're not so likely to do that. Unless you have an organization like Wikileaks where you could go to and anonymously, report the information. And again, Wikileaks, everything they've ever published has been verified as true. And so it's not like this organization is going out there and spreading lies. Then that's a very beneficial thing and something that will allow democracy to continue to exist without so many state secrets bending the perceived truth of the nation. Couple stories on North Korea real quick. The first one is out of 38 North, and that is North Korea has begun to dismantle their main satellite launching site. This is something that the U.S. has asked them to do, and I guess is a part of the Singapore Summit Accord. So hopefully we will, continue to see progress here. Of course, I'm sure it won't get as much coverage as, every time the North Koreans do anything even remotely, against the wishes of the United States of America. It does look like the talks are moving again the right direction on North Korea transferring the remains of some American soldiers from the Korean War back to the United States of America. As I pointed out immediately after the, Trump-Kim summit, that the advantage here is that this is something that North Korea could do to show goodwill towards the United States and create some good publicity. So, hopefully this happens, as we here come up on the 2018 midterms, and Donald Trump and the Republicans may be trying to sell a little bit to the American people the benefits of potential Korean peace and being able to return bodies to, widows or families of those service members who died back in the 1950s would probably, turn some pretty good publicity and maybe some more favor among Americans to the Korean issue. Because right now, if you read the news, the Trump derangement syndrome is kicked in so hard that even when Trump is trying to do something good and push for peace, people are always steadfast against it. Some quick news on Afghanistan. I already mentioned the U.S. is at 3,000 bombs so far in 2018. This is a record up to this point in the year, although that number only goes back to 2013 because that's when the numbers start to be tracked. The U.S. killed 14 civilians in an airstrike. I believe this was in the Kunduz province of Afghanistan. Initially, the U.S. claimed that these were members of the Taliban and that the Afghan government had carried out the strike, but now it looks like it was the U.S. government, and those children there were definitely civilians. Former Afghani Vice President General Dostum has returned to the country. He fled for, I think, a second or third time from the country in 2017 after accusations surfaced that he tortured a former political ally turned political rival, and then kind of his trademark terribleness, he sodomized that person with the barrel of a rifle. At his return at the airport, as he returns, ISIS carries out a suicide bombing, killing, I believe, 11 people. There's quite a bit of other important news, but that's where I'm going to wrap up the show for today. Of course, I think on Wednesday's show, I'm going to get into a little bit more of the stuff going on with Iran. I want to dedicate some more time to that. Of course, we had the big all-caps tweet by Donald Trump. I'll just say, that this isn't a declaration of war, and it's something that the media is going to talk about a lot. But this is unfortunate because they're never going to talk about in the detail of what it would really mean to go to war with Iran. They're just going to talk, oh, look how loud and stupid our president is on Twitter, which he is, no doubt. But at the same time, it's not the most important issue. It's that, what's going to happen to the 80 million Iranians, the hundreds of thousands of American troops that go over there, the Americans that are reliant on the American government for welfare, and now the Americans are, could pretty much go out and set fire to trillions of dollars that we'll end up spending in Iran. But the United States is working on that as well as a lot of other things with the upcoming sanctions that the United States is slowly rolling back on Iran, as per the United States leaving the JCPOA. But the good news that I'll just mention right here at the end, it does seem that Donald Trump has invited Vladimir Putin to a meeting at the White House. Potentially, I think he invited Angela Merkel to that meeting as well. This will be, I think, a very good thing to have Putin come to the White House. This certainly isn't, dangerous or anything. It's not like the United States is in open war with Russia and Vladimir Putin's going to, plant a secret nuclear device in DC or anything stupid like that. This will just be talks between two world leaders who have an awful lot of interest, an awful lot of competing interests, and working things out through diplomacy is a hell of a lot better than having our soldiers do it. So hopefully y'all like this show. Keep sharing the show if you do enjoy it. Again, libertarianinstitute.org. I suggest to find the show and share the show from there. I really appreciate that I get put my show out there. It has helped the show to grow a lot. And, to all of you fine people who share it, I really do appreciate that as well. foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com. The news website is immersionnews.com. I think that site is really cool. I update it all the time, so check it out for the latest news. Immersionnews.com has the YouTube and BitChute pages for the show, so just go to Immersion News to find those channels. Twitter is at KYAAALE, and Facebook is Libertarian Union. Thanks, everyone.